She was just 17 when she inherited her grandpa's dusty old tool barn, a place she barely remembered. But what she discovered hidden behind its walls would change not just her future, but her entire understanding of the past. This is the story of how an inheritance that looked like a burden turned out to be a second chance. If you've ever felt lost and then found a place to stand your ground, I think this will mean something to you. Stick around, and maybe subscribe if you believe in stories about fighting for what's yours. The door to the Northgate Youth Services facility clicked shut behind me with a sound I knew better than my own heartbeat. It was a heavy, metallic sigh of finality, the same sound that had punctuated every failed family visit, every transfer, every time a file was closed. For 6 years, that sound had meant I was staying. Today, it meant I was leaving. For good. I turned 18 at midnight, and by 8:05 a.m., I was standing on the curb with a state-issued debit card holding $75 and a black trash bag containing 2 pairs of jeans, a handful of shirts, my toothbrush, and a worn copy of a book I'd read a dozen times. The sky was the color of dishwater, a low, flat gray that mirrored the concrete of the building I was leaving behind. A cold November wind snaked its way through my thin jacket, a parting gift from the system. Freedom felt a lot like being cold and alone on a random Tuesday morning. I clutched the plastic strap of the trash bag, the crinkling sound loud in the quiet street. My caseworker, a perpetually tired woman named Mrs. Gable, had given me a thin manila envelope along with my discharge papers. "This came for you a while ago," she'd said, not meeting my eyes. "From a lawyer. We're supposed to hold it until your 18th. She handed it over like it was contaminated. It was stiff and official, my name, Maya Jacobs, typed neatly on the front, along with the address for Northgate. It was the first piece of mail I'd received in years that wasn't a form letter. I tucked it into the inside pocket of my jacket, a strange weight against my ribs. I walked the 3 blocks to the bus station, the trash bag bumping against my leg. I didn't have a destination. The plan, if you could call it that, was to take a bus to the city center, find a shelter, and start the process of not being homeless. That was the bar. Don't be homeless. Don't fail. Don't end up back in a different kind of system. The bus ride was a blur of smudged windows and the faces of strangers, each lost in their own world. I kept my hand over the envelope in my pocket, the sharp corner of the paper digging into my palm. It was a mystery, and for the first time in a long time, it was a mystery that belonged only to me. In the city, the noise was a physical assault after the muted quiet of Northgate. I found a small, steamy coffee shop and used 5 of my $75 on a black coffee I didn't really want. It was an excuse to sit at a table in the back, to be invisible for a little while longer. My hands trembled as I pulled out the envelope. The return address was for a law firm, Albright and Associates. I didn't know anyone named Albright. With a deep breath, I tore it open. The paper inside was thick, expensive. It smelled faintly of vanilla and old books. The letter was formal, dated 6 months prior. It began, "Dear Ms. Jacobs, please be advised that this firm represents the estate of the late Mr. Thomas Jacobs." My breath caught in my throat. Thomas Jacobs. Grandpa. He died 2 years ago. I'd gotten the news via a phone call to Mrs. Gable, a brief, sterile notification. There was no funeral for me to attend, no family to grieve with. Just another file updated, another loss absorbed into the quiet hum of institutional life. The letter went on. It turned out my grandfather, the quiet man who smelled of sawdust and engine oil, the man who had taught me how to skip stones on the creek behind his house before he disappeared from my life, had left me something. He had a will, and I was in it. Pursuant to the terms of Mr. Jacobs's last will and testament, the letter continued, "You are the sole beneficiary of the property located at 1140 Old Creek Road, Miller's Ridge, a property. I own something." The idea was so foreign it felt like a language I couldn't speak. My world had been a succession of temporary beds and shared rooms. The concept of a place being mine was impossible to grasp. But the next paragraph brought the cold, hard reality crashing in. "Please be further advised that the property carries a significant lien for delinquent property taxes, currently amounting to $14,83254. The county has initiated foreclosure proceedings, $14,000. I looked at the debit card in my wallet. I had 70. The number was so large it was meaningless. It was like being told I owed $1 million or $1 billion. It was a debt from a different planet. Then came the final section. We have, however, received a standing offer from Viridian Development LLC to purchase the property as is for the sum of $25,000. This offer would be sufficient to satisfy the tax lien in full and remit the balance of approximately $10,000 to you, $10,000. That number wasn't meaningless. $10,000 was a different life. It was a security deposit on an apartment. It was months of not worrying about food. It was a bus ticket to anywhere, a real suitcase instead of a trash bag. It was a buffer against the world that had chewed me up and spit me out. A small, pre-printed card fell out of the envelope. It had the Viridian Development logo on it and a simple message. A straightforward, no-hassle offer for your convenience. At the bottom of the lawyer's letter was a final, handwritten note from Mr. Albright himself. Ms. Jacobs, the developer's offer expires in 1 week. Please contact my office to proceed with the sale. It is, in my professional opinion, your most prudent course of action. Prudent. The word hung in the air. Sell a place I'd never seen to pay a debt I'd never known I had, and walk away with a small fortune. It was the sensible thing to do. It was the only thing to do. I sat there in the coffee shop, the noise of the city fading into a dull roar. I tried to remember the property. Miller's Ridge. Old Creek Road. A vague image surfaced in my mind. A memory from before my parents. Before everything. A big, dark red building. The smell of cut grass and gasoline. My grandfather, his hands calloused and stained, lifting me up to see a bird's nest in the rafters. A barn. He had left me a barn. I looked at the offer from Viridian. $10,000 for a memory I wasn't even sure was real. But what was the alternative? To let the county take it for nothing? I was 18 years old with $70 to my name. I couldn't fight for a piece of land I couldn't afford. The choice was already made. And yet, something held me back. A stubborn little ember of defiance that the system hadn't managed to extinguish. Before I sold my last connection to him, to a life before the files and the case numbers, I had to see it. I had to stand there just once. I finished my coffee, the bitter liquid doing nothing to warm me. I walked out of the shop and back to the bus station. I went to the ticket counter, the debit card feeling flimsy in my hand. A one-way ticket to Miller's Ridge, I said, my voice barely a whisper. The man behind the counter didn't even look up. The bus ride to Miller's Ridge was a journey backward in time. The sprawling cityscape slowly gave way to suburbs, then to stretches of highway flanked by thinning forests, the trees bare and skeletal against the November sky. I watched the world go by, my reflection a pale ghost in the window. I tried to pull more memories of my grandfather from the fog of my childhood, but they were like fragments of a broken plate. I remembered his smile, the way the corners of his eyes crinkled. I remembered the feel of his rough, warm hand holding mine. He was a constant, solid presence in the chaos of my early years, a quiet harbor until the storm of my parents' lives finally wrecked everything. They were taken from me first, in a blur of blue lights and shouting I didn't understand. Then he was gone too. I was told he couldn't take care of me, that it was for the best. I was 7. I spent the next 11 years believing he had abandoned me. And now, he had left me a barn with a $14,000 debt attached. Felt like a final, cruel joke. Was this his way of telling me I was on my own? The bus wheezed to a stop in what could barely be called a town. A single main street with a gas station, a small grocery store, and a diner with a flickering neon sign. Miller's Ridge. It was smaller and sadder than I remembered. The air was different here. Colder, cleaner, smelling of damp earth and wood smoke. I asked the bus driver, a kind-faced man with a thick gray mustache, if he knew Old Creek Road. He nodded. About a 2-mile walk that way, he said, pointing down a road that disappeared between 2 hills. Not much out there anymore. Just the old Jacobs place. He looked at me for a second longer than he should have. You family? I just nodded, the word feeling strange in my mouth. "He was a good man, Thomas Jacobs," the driver said quietly. "Kept to himself, but a good man." The walk was cold. The wind was sharper here without buildings to block it. It whipped my hair across my face and made my eyes water. The road was cracked asphalt, crumbling at the edges. Fields stretched out on either side, fallow and brown. There were no other houses. Just the wind, the gray sky, and the sound of my own footsteps on the pavement. I felt impossibly small. After what felt like an eternity, I saw it. Set back from the road, at the end of a gravel driveway choked with weeds, was a large, faded red barn. Its roof sagged slightly in the middle, like a tired old man slumping his shoulders. The paint was peeling, and one of the large sliding doors hung crookedly on its track. This was it. This was my inheritance. My $10,000 problem. I walked up the driveway, the gravel crunching under my feet. The place was silent, but it was a different kind of silence than the institution. This was a natural quiet, the silence of a place that was simply waiting. A heavy chain was wrapped around the two large doors, secured with a rusty, formidable-looking padlock. The key. I'd forgotten about the key. Mr. Albright's letter had mentioned it was taped to the back of the envelope. My fingers, numb with cold, fumbled inside my jacket. There it was. A single, old-fashioned iron key. It was heavy, ornate. It looked like it belonged in a fairy tale. The key slid into the padlock with a grating sound. For a second, it wouldn't turn. I put my other hand on it, using both to twist. The rust fought back, a stubborn protest against being disturbed after so long. Then, with a loud crack that echoed in the stillness, the mechanism gave way. The lock sprang open. I unwound the heavy chain, its links clinking together, and let it fall to the ground. I took hold of the crooked door and pulled. It resisted, groaning as the bottom edge scraped against the gravel and dirt. I put my shoulder into it, pushing with all my weight. Slowly, painfully, it slid open just enough for me to slip through. I stepped inside and the world changed. The wind died away, and the air became thick, still, and heavy with the scent of 100 forgotten years. It smelled of motor oil, sawdust, damp earth, and something else. Something uniquely his. It was the smell of my grandfather. Dust motes danced like tiny fairies in the single beam of gray light slanting down from a grimy window high in the rafters. The barn was cavernous, much larger than it had looked from the outside. The main floor was packed with the ghosts of a life's work. A massive, ancient-looking tractor sat under a dusty tarp, its tires flat. Shelves lined the walls, sagging under the weight of countless jars filled with nuts, bolts, and screws, all meticulously sorted. Old tools hung from pegboards. Wrenches, saws, and hammers, each with a patina of rust in use. It wasn't a junk pile. It was an archive of labor. Everything was covered in a thick blanket of dust, a shroud of neglect. But underneath there was order, a place for everything and everything in its place. This had been his sanctuary. My eyes adjusted to the dim light. In the center of the space stood a heavy wooden workbench. It was scarred and stained, a map of thousands of hours of work. A metal vise was bolted to one corner, its jaws clamped shut. On the wall behind the bench, more tools hung in neat, orderly rows. I ran my hand over the surface of the bench, my fingers leaving a clean streak in the dust. I could almost see him standing here, his brow furrowed in concentration, his hands confidently shaping wood or metal. This was the heart of the place. This was the heart of him. I felt a wave of profound sadness wash over me. This place, so full of his presence, was about to be sold to a faceless company and likely torn down. All this history, this evidence of a life lived, would be reduced to a check that would buy me a few months of anonymous existence in a city that didn't care. Felt wrong. Felt like a betrayal. I leaned against the workbench, the rough wood pressing into my back. My eyes traced the lines of the tools on the wall. Everything was so perfectly arranged, a testament to a mind that valued order and precision. Except for one spot. Near the bottom right of the pegboard, there was a strange gap. A hammer hung there, but the wall behind it wasn't the same dark, oil-stained wood as the rest. It was a slightly lighter shade, a rectangle of newer-looking planking that had been inexpertly stained to match the older wood. It was almost perfectly done. Almost. The grain didn't quite line up. The color was just a fraction off. It was the kind of detail you would only notice if you were staring, if you were looking for something that was out of place. My heart started to beat a little faster. It was probably nothing. A repair. A patch where the wood had rotted. But my grandfather was not a man for clumsy repairs. The rest of the barn told me that. I reached out and took the hammer off its hook. I ran my fingers over the rectangular section of wall. The seams were almost invisible, but I could feel them. A faint, hairline crack outlining a perfect rectangle about 2 feet wide and 3 feet high. I pressed on it. Nothing. I tried to find a latch, a handle, a hidden button. Nothing. It was just a solid piece of wall. I was being ridiculous, letting my imagination run wild. I was just a desperate kid looking for a miracle. And maybe that's all the story is about. A desperate kid looking for a miracle. Sometimes when you're at the absolute bottom, when you have nothing left to lose, you start looking for hidden doors. You start believing that there's more to the story than what's on the surface. If you've ever been in that place, if you've ever had to stare at a wall and hope there was something on the other side, I want you to know I'm reading the comments on this video. Your story matters. And if you're finding some hope in mine, hitting that like button lets me know I'm not just talking to myself out here. It means a lot. Now back to the barn. I stood there, staring at that patch of wall, feeling like an idiot. I was cold, I was tired, and I was supposed to be figuring out how to call a lawyer and become $10,000 richer. Instead, I was chasing ghosts. I knocked on the panel. The sound was different. The rest of the wall gave a solid, dense thud. This section gave a hollow, resonant boom. There was space back there. Cavity. Adrenaline, sharp and electric, shot through me. I looked around the workbench. My eyes landed on a long, thin pry bar lying next to the vise. Its end was flattened into a chisel shape. It was heavy in my hand, cold and solid. I took a deep breath. This was crazy. I was about to punch a hole in the one thing of value I owned in the entire world. But the feeling, the gut instinct, was too strong to ignore. I wedged the tip of the pry bar into the hairline crack at the bottom of the panel. I leaned on it. The old wood groaned in protest. Splinters popped. For a second, nothing happened. Then, with a sharp crack, the bottom edge of the panel splintered and lifted a fraction of an inch. I had a purchase. I worked the pry bar back and forth, slowly widening the gap. The wood was stubborn, held in place by nails that didn't want to let go of their decades-long grip. My arms started to burn, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Finally, with one last heave, the panel tore away from the wall with a screech of tortured nails and fell forward, landing on the dusty floor with a loud bang that echoed through the cavernous barn. I stared into the darkness behind it. It was a small, crudely framed cavity in the wall, about a foot deep, and sitting on a small shelf inside was a gray, metal lockbox. It was an old army surplus ammo can, the kind you see at flea markets. It wasn't locked, just latched. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely work the simple clasp. I lifted the heavy lid. The inside was lined with what looked like old, yellowed foam. And nestled within that foam were two things. The first was a stack of letters, at least 30 of them, tied together with a piece of butcher's twine. The top envelope simply said, "For Maya." The second thing was underneath the letters. It was a stack of $100 bills, wrapped in a thick rubber band. I didn't count it, couldn't. My mind refused to process it. I just stared, my brain short-circuiting. I sank to my knees on the floor, the pry bar clattering beside me. I picked up the bundle of letters. The twine was old and brittle. It snapped in my fingers. The top letter was thick, the envelope soft with age. My name was written in my grandfather's hand. A strong, slightly slanted script I recognized from the one birthday card I still had from him, tucked into the back of my book. My fingers trembled as I unfolded the first page. The date at the top was from just after my 7th birthday, a few weeks after I'd been taken into the system. "My dearest Maya," it began. If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and you have found your way back here. It means you are 18 and a woman grown. I am so sorry. Those are the first words I need to say. I am sorry for not being there. I am sorry for the silence. I need you to know that the silence was not because I didn't love you. It was because I loved you too much to let you get caught in the wreckage. I had to stop and take a breath, my vision blurring with tears I hadn't realized were forming. I had spent 11 years building a fortress around my heart, and his first few sentences were already tearing it down, brick by brick. Your parents, he wrote, and my stomach tightened, were good people, deep down, but they were lost. They got mixed up with some very bad people, Maya. Owed them money they couldn't pay. Started small, but it grew into a monster that ate their lives. They made choices I couldn't understand, took risks that put you in danger. The night they took you away, the night with the lights and the sirens, that wasn't the state saving you from them. That was me. I made the call. I told them you weren't safe. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. Felt like cutting off my own arm. They told me if I took you myself, the people your parents owed would come looking for you. They would use you to get to your parents or to get to me. The social worker, a good woman, she told me the only way to make you disappear, to truly keep you safe, was to let the system swallow you. To make you a ward of the state. No forwarding address. No contact. A ghost. They said it was the only way to break the chain. I sat there on the cold, dusty floor of the barn, the world tilting on its axis. The story I had told myself for over a decade, the story of abandonment, of being thrown away, was a lie. It wasn't an abandonment. It was a protection. A brutal, desperate, and heartbreaking act of love. He hadn't thrown me away. He had hidden me. I cried. I don't know for how long. I cried for the little girl who thought her grandpa didn't want her. I cried for the teenager who had hardened her heart to survive. And I cried for him, for the lonely old man who had to give up the one person he loved to save her. The letter continued, his steady handwriting a lifeline in the swirl of my emotions. I fought to get you back, Maya. For the first 2 years, I went to every court date. I filed every paper. But they were relentless. The people your parents were involved with, they had connections. They made it clear that if I ever got custody, you would never be safe. They saw you as an asset, a piece of leverage. So I had to make another choice. I had to let you go, truly. I had to stop fighting, stop showing up. I had to become a ghost, too. But I never stopped watching. I got reports. I knew which homes you were in. I knew you were safe, fed, and in school. It was a pale, pathetic substitute for being your grandfather. But it was all I had. My chest ached with a pain so deep it felt physical. All those years I'd felt invisible. He had been watching from the shadows. He hadn't forgotten me. He had never, for 1 second, forgotten me. This barn, the letter went on. This land, it was the only thing I had that was truly mine, free and clear. Your parents had signed over their share of the house years ago. But the barn was mine. I knew they couldn't touch it. So I started to make a plan. I knew one day you would be 18. You would be free. And maybe, just maybe, you would need a place to start. Place that was yours. So I started saving. Every extra dollar from every odd job, every tractor I fixed, every piece of furniture I repaired. It's not a fortune what's in this box. But I hoped it would be enough. Enough for the taxes. Enough for a start. There's a development company, Viridian, that's been sniffing around this land for years. They're like vultures. They've been buying up all the old family plots, trying to force people out. They'll probably come to you with a lowball offer the second you inherit this place. They'll see a kid in trouble and try to take advantage. Don't let them. This land is more than just dirt, Maya. This is your ground. Your place to stand. I unfolded the next letter. And the next. For hours, I sat on the floor and read the story of my life through his eyes. He wrote about my parents' descent, his grief and helplessness. He wrote about his lonely days in the barn, fixing things for other people while his own family was broken. He wrote about me. He had notes from my case managers, third-hand information he'd gotten from a friend who worked at the county office. Heard you won the spelling bee in 3rd grade, one letter said. Your teacher said you were the smartest kid in the class. I was so proud. Another. They said you were quiet in the new group home. I hope you're not too lonely. I hope you have a book to read. He had followed my life from a distance, celebrating my tiny victories and mourning my struggles in silence, pouring it all onto these pages. It was a record of a love that had been forced underground but had never died. The last letter was dated just a month before he passed away. His handwriting was shakier now, the confident script wavering.
I'm tired, Maya.
The work is getting harder. I don't know how much longer I have. I hope I've done enough. I hope this is waiting for you when you need it. I want you to know the truth. Not the story they told you, but the real one. The one where you were loved, fiercely and completely, every single day. This barn isn't just a building. It's a promise I made to myself. A promise that one day you would have a home. What you do with it is up to you. You can sell it, take the money and run and never look back. There is no shame in that. You deserve an easy life after the one you've had. But if you choose to stay, if you choose to fight for this place, well, that would be something. That would be the best part of me living on in you. Whatever you choose, know that your grandpa loved you more than words can say. Be good. Be strong. Be happy. Love, Grandpa Thomas. When I finished the last letter, the light from the high window had faded to a deep, bruised purple. The barn was cold and dark. I was shivering, but I didn't feel it. A storm of grief and rage and a fierce, burning love was raging inside me. The neat, simple story of my life had been obliterated. I wasn't an abandoned child. I was a protected one. I wasn't the unlucky victim of a broken family. I was the heir to a legacy of quiet, stubborn resistance. The $10,000 offer from Viridian Development felt like an insult. It was blood money. They wanted to bulldoze this monument to my grandfather's love and turn it into soulless condominiums. My phone, a cheap burner I'd bought with my $75, had 1 bar of service. I pulled out the card from Mr. Albright, the lawyer. The developer's offer expired tomorrow. I had a choice to make. The choice my grandfather had laid out for me. Take the easy money or fight. The old me, the girl who walked out of Northgate this morning, would have taken the money without a second thought. Survival was the only thing that mattered. But I wasn't that girl anymore. That girl didn't know she was loved. That girl didn't know she came from a line of fighters. I looked at the stack of cash in the ammo can. I hadn't counted it yet. With trembling fingers, I picked it up and slipped off the rubber band. I started counting. 100, 200, 500. The stack was bigger than it looked. My grandfather hadn't just saved. He had sacrificed. 10,000, 12, 14. When I finished, the total was $15,000. Enough. It was enough. Enough to pay the taxes and have $367.46 left over. It wasn't $10,000. It wasn't a new life handed to me on a platter. It was something better. It was a fighting chance. It was the tool he had left me. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the cold air burning my lungs. I found Mr. Albright's number and dialed. The phone rang 3 times, then went to voicemail. I almost hung up. My throat was tight, my voice gone. But then I looked at the letters piled on the floor. I looked at the workbench. I thought of his hands. I cleared my throat and spoke. Mr. Albright, I said, my voice hoarse but steady. This is Maya Jacobs. I'm calling about the property at 1140 Old Creek Road. I'm not selling. I'm keeping it. I ended the call before he could answer, before I could change my mind. I had made my choice. I was staying. The next morning, I woke up stiff and cold on a pile of dusty tarps, the first rays of morning light cutting through the grime on the windows. For the first time in my adult life, I hadn't slept in a room with strangers. I had slept in my own home. The finality of my decision from the night before had settled in, a heavy but solid weight in my gut. I wasn't just staying, I was fighting. And the first battle was against time and bureaucracy. I used the last of my phone's battery to look up the address for the county tax office. It was in the next town over, a 40-minute bus ride away. I counted out the $15,000 again, my hands still shaking slightly at the sight of it. I bundled it into the ammo can along with the letters. Felt safer there. I found an old, greasy backpack hanging from a hook and put the box inside. Then I slid the big barn door open and stepped out into the crisp morning air. The world looked different. The peeling paint on the barn didn't look like decay anymore. It looked like character. The overgrown weeds didn't look like neglect. They looked like a challenge. The walk back to the main street of Miller's Ridge felt shorter this time. I stopped at the small grocery store, its bell jingling as I opened the door. An older woman behind the counter looked up from her newspaper. "Help you?" she asked, her eyes sharp and curious. I bought a bottle of water and a protein bar, my first meal in almost 24 hours. As I paid, she said, "You're staying out at the old Jacobs place, aren't you? Saw you walking out that way yesterday." I nodded, bracing for judgment. "Place has been empty a long time," she said, her expression softening. "Thomas was a good customer. Kvietman. Fixed my husband's lawnmower more times than I can count. Never charged us what he should have." She pushed my change back across the counter. "Glad to see someone's out there. The place deserves a life." Her small act of kindness was like a crack of light in my armor. Maybe I wasn't entirely alone in this fight. The bus ride to the county seat was nerve-wracking. The backpack with the cash felt like it was glowing. I imagined being robbed, losing it all, failing my grandfather before I even had a chance to begin. The county building was an imposing brick structure, filled with the smell of old paper and stale coffee. I found the tax assessor's office and stood in line, my heart pounding against my ribs. The woman at the counter looked as tired as Mrs. Gable. "How can I help you?" she asked, her voice flat. "I'm here to pay the back taxes on the property at 1140 Old Creek Road," I said. "The Jacobs property." She typed the address into her computer, her expression unchanging. "Jacobs, right? That's in foreclosure. Scheduled for auction next month." She looked up at me, a flicker of pity in her eyes. "The total due is $14,832.54. She said it like she was daring me to have it. I took a deep breath, unzipped the backpack, and lifted the heavy ammo can onto the counter. I opened the lid and took out the bundle of cash. Her eyes widened. She stared at the money, then at me, then back at the money. "You're paying in cash?" she whispered, as if we were in a library. I just nodded. She called her supervisor over. They took me into a back room and counted the money 3 times with a machine. They checked every bill. It felt like a criminal interrogation, but every bill was real. Every dollar was there. An hour later, I walked out with a receipt stamped, paid in full, and a document halting the foreclosure. I was $367.46 poorer, but the barn was mine, free and clear. It was the single most terrifying and exhilarating thing I had ever done. My phone rang as I was waiting for the bus back to Miller's Ridge. It was an unknown number. I answered it. "Ms. Jacobs? This is Robert Albright." His voice was different than I'd imagined. Younger, less stuffy. "I got your message. I have to admit, I was surprised. I'm keeping the property," I said, my voice stronger now. "I paid the taxes this morning." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "You paid them? All of them?" "Yes, Ms. Jacobs." "Maya," he said, his tone shifting from professional to personal. "Viridian is not going to be happy. Their offer was contingent on the tax lien. Now that it's cleared, they have no leverage. But they won't just go away. They want that land." "I know," I said. "My grandfather warned me about them in his letters." "Letters?" he asked, his interest piqued. I hesitated, then told him everything. About the hidden box, the letters, the cash. I told him the real story of why I was in the system. When I was finished, there was another long silence. "My God," he finally said, his voice soft. "Thomas never said a word. He just told me to make sure you got the property, no matter what. He made me his executor and gave me one instruction: protect the inheritance for Maya." I thought he was just a stubborn old man. I had no idea he cleared his throat. "Listen, Maya. You're not my client anymore in the traditional sense, but I feel a certain responsibility here. Your grandfather was more than just a name on a file to me. You're going to need help. Viridian plays dirty. They'll try to find code violations, zoning issues, anything to force you out. You need to get that place cleaned up. Make it habitable. Establish residency. The best defense you have is to live there. His advice solidified what I already knew I had to do. This wasn't just about owning the barn. It was about inhabiting it, making it a home. The work began the next day. The first task was cleaning. Decades of dust and grime covered everything. I started in one corner with a broom I found and began the long, slow process of reclaiming the space.
I swept, I scrubbed, I sorted.
I filled dozens of trash bags with actual garbage, rotted tarps, empty oil cans, nests of mice. But I was careful with his things. The tools, I wiped down one by one, oiling the metal parts to ward off the rust, hanging them back on their hooks. The jars of screws and bolts I dusted and rearranged. It was grueling physical labor. My muscles ached in ways I didn't know they could. My hands were raw and blistered. Every night I would collapse onto my makeshift bed of tarps, too tired to even dream. But with every square foot of floor I cleared, with every tool I cleaned, I felt like I was earning my place there. I wasn't just cleaning a building. I was tending to his memory. I was having a conversation with him through his possessions. I found more of him in the work. I found a half-finished birdhouse on the workbench, the tiny pieces of wood cut with precision. I found a worn leather apron hanging on a nail, smelling faintly of his sweat and his labor. I found a photograph tucked into a toolbox, a faded picture of a much younger him, holding a little girl with pigtails on his shoulders. Me. We were both smiling. The barn slowly transformed. The oppressive gloom lifted as I scrubbed the grime from the windows, letting in more and more light. I used some of my remaining money to buy a second-hand cot from a thrift store, a hot plate, and a few pots and pans. I ran an extension cord from the one working outlet to my new kitchen. It was primitive, but it was mine. I was building a life nail by nail, scrap by scrap. I got a part-time job bussing tables at the diner in town. The pay was terrible, but it was enough for groceries. The owner, a woman named Sarah, was the bus driver's daughter. She'd heard about the Jacobs girl who was fixing up the old barn. She gave me a chance. The people in town started to talk to me. The woman at the grocery store would save me the day-old bread. The bus driver would honk and wave when he passed my driveway. I was no longer just a ghost. I was becoming a neighbor. One evening, a black sedan pulled up my driveway. A man in a suit got out. He was from Viridian Development. He didn't offer to shake my hand. "Ms. Jacobs," he said, his smile thin and predatory. "We were sorry to hear you rejected our generous offer. We're prepared to increase it. 40,000. Cash. It was a staggering amount of money. Could have changed everything. But I just looked at him. Then at the barn, its red paint now looking more vibrant in the evening sun. "It's not for sale," I said. His smile vanished. "That's a shame," he said, his voice turning cold. "This is a big piece of land for one person. Things happen. Fires. Accidents. It would be a tragedy if something were to happen to this old tinderbox." It was a threat, plain and simple. Fear, cold and familiar, coiled in my stomach. But then I felt something else rise up to meet it. My grandfather's stubbornness. My own resilience. I had survived the system. I would survive this. "You should go," I said, my voice not shaking. "You're on private property." He stared at me for a long moment, then got back in his car and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. That night, I didn't sleep on the cot. I brought the metal box with my grandfather's letters into my small living area. I read them again, his words a shield against the darkness. He had faced down his own fears to protect me. Now it was my turn to protect his legacy. Months have passed since that day. The spring now. The fields around the barn are turning green, and the creek I barely remembered is full and rushing with melted snow. Viridian hasn't given up. I get official-looking letters about zoning ordinances I don't understand. County inspectors show up, looking for violations. But Mr. Albright has been true to his word. He helps me navigate the paperwork, filing responses, keeping them at bay. He says as long as I'm living here improving the property, they have a weak case. They're just trying to intimidate me. And it is a home now. I used some of the money from the diner to buy paint, barn red, of course. I've started painting the outside walls, covering the faded, peeling wood with a fresh, vibrant coat. It's a slow process, but every brushstroke feels like a declaration of intent. I finished the little birdhouse my grandfather started and hung it on a tree near the front door. A family of bluebirds has already moved in. The inside of the barn is still mostly a workshop, but my small corner is cozy. I have a bookshelf now, filled with books from the thrift store. I have a small rug on the floor. At night, I leave the big doors open a crack and listen to the sounds of the country. The crickets, the owls, the wind in the trees. It's a different kind of quiet now. It's not the silence of absence. It's the silence of peace. I don't know what the future holds. The fight with Viridian is far from over. Life is still hard. But for the first time, it feels like my life. I'm not just a case file number. I'm Maya Jacobs, the girl who lives in the red barn on Old Creek Road. The girl whose grandfather loved her enough to build her a fortress disguised as a ruin. This inheritance wasn't the $15,000 in the box. It wasn't the deed to a piece of land. The real inheritance was the story he left me. The truth. He gave me back my past, and in doing so, he gave me a future. He taught me that home isn't just a place you're given. It's a place you claim. It's a place you fight for. It's the ground you choose to stand on, even when the wind is trying to blow you over. Sometimes the things that look like burdens are actually foundations in disguise. A dusty old barn, a pile of debt, a painful history. They can be the very things you use to build a new life. It's about looking past the peeling paint and the rust to see the solid bones underneath. It's about choosing to pick up a hammer or a paintbrush or just a broom and starting the work. It's not about waiting for a miracle. It's about making one. So I want to ask you something. What in your life looks like a ruin but might actually be a foundation? What story have you been told that needs to be rewritten? Maybe you've been through the system, maybe you felt abandoned, or maybe you're just standing at a crossroads trying to figure out which way to go. I want you to know you're not alone. This community we're building here, it's for people like us. People who know that the most valuable things aren't always the shiniest. If this story meant something to you, if it gave you a little bit of hope or made you feel a little less alone, consider subscribing. Join us. And please, in the comments below, tell me your story. Tell me about a time you chose to fight for your piece of ground. I'll be reading them, because every story of survival, every story of building a home against the odds, is a light in the dark. Thank you for listening. Be good, be strong, and be happy.